Alright guys, hello. Today I'm going to be ranking on a tier list the US presidents. As you know, I'm a history channel and this James Buchanan. And this may reveal a few of my biases, a few of my political leanings and in certain areas and on certain subjects. But I encourage you, if you have a comment, keep it civil, guys. I don't want in the comments like all out debates and people like at each other's throats over this stuff. So just if you're gonna have a historical conversation, have a historical conversation. So there's going to be a few presidents that I won't be ranking, but since on this tier list there is no the term escapes me here. Was it? Oh, there's no out of consideration. I'm just gonna leave them at the bottom. Out of consideration, there's only a few that I can't rank because either they were in presidents in the office for too short, they they died too short into their presidency. There were a few presidents like that. So, without further ado, let's just get straight into this. All right, so I'll start with George W. Wow, what a way to start off. Um, George W. I think I'm gonna put him at a D. Um, for George W. The main reason is like his flippity floppityness on certain issues, like capitalism, where he said he would like lower taxes to create growth, and then did the exact opposite. Also, I'm not against the war in Afghanistan thing, but I am against the war in Iraq thing. Um, this is a general issue. I'm not necessarily an anti-interventionist. There are some people who are like full-blown anti-interventionist, and there are some people who are like full-blown pro-interventionist. I'm somewhere in between. But on this particular war that he got us involved in Iraq, I mean Afghanistan, I can see why we had to go and take revenge on the people who ran the planes into the towers. That's like completely logical, and I can see why Americans wanted that. But the whole Iraq thing and the excuses like, oh, they could have held nuclear weapons that they could have used against the United States. I mean, I can see some of it, but I don't like how he handled that very well. James Buchanan F. I mean, do I really have to justify this? Um, he was the president just before the Civil War. Didn't do anything to stop it from happening. Just a very bland president. Didn't do anything in general, really. But he was very warm to the people who were threatening to secede. He just didn't know how to like function as a president. So that's why I have him at F. But all right, Jimmy Carter. I am gonna put him at F as well. During the 70s, during that period, inflation was very high, did things that only caused it to get worse, like raising taxes and stuff like that. He he became way too soft on the Soviet Union at a time when they were starting to become more aggressive. His foreign policy, the way he handled certain crises that I think it was called the Iran hostage crisis, didn't handle that very well, in my opinion. So overall, I'm just going to throw Jimmy Carter in that category. Chester Arthur, don't really know much about him. I know that he did. Was it him or was it Grover Cleveland? I think it was him. He vetoed a lot of things. Like there are a lot of bills, big government bills in particular, that he vetoed and said just go just don't, I don't want this to happen, and he vetoed so many things that I think he may have vetoed the most out of any president, or maybe that was Grover Cleveland. I can't remember, but he vetoed a bunch of things, which again is limiting the president's power. And as a person who likes limited government, I'm a fan. So, but other than that, not really much to say about him. Grover Cleveland, I'm gonna throw Grover Cleveland in B tier. So the reason why I'm going to put him in B tier is because he's an absolute mad lad. He ran for president, won, And then I can't remember if he lost or just decided he didn't want to run at that time. So he passed on his office to Benjamin Harrison. Since a lot of people didn't really like Benjamin Harrison that much, he would become reelected again non-consecutively after Benjamin Harrison's term. So he was a Democrat, but he was much more in favor of Republican policies on business, like lowering taxes and making sure businesses could function with in both foreign and domestic. He again, I think it may have been him or Chester Arthur that vetoed a lot of things, limiting the government's power. I always like that. But yeah, so overall, Grover Cleveland, just going to stick him up in the B category. Controversial president incoming. Bill Clinton. What is there I can say? Oh, wait, hold on. I'll be right back. I gotta get something. Just moving my chairs. All right, I'm back. As I said, controversial president incoming. Bill. So, what can I say about Bill? Bill, he was. I'm gonna set aside the whole Monica Lewinsky thing because he was impeached over his alleged relations to her and all that stuff. So, but I'm just gonna leave that out because a rule that I have to set before I start the tier list, I should have probably told you already, is that I'm not ranking presidents based on their personality, their decisions outside of the office of the presidency. I'm purely ranking them based on what they did in office. So, that being said, Bill Clinton is actually going to go a C. So, Bill did a lot of things to improve the American economy. He beat George H.W., who was the vice president to one of the most popular American presidents in the history of the country, Ronald Reagan. And he managed to beat him nonetheless. He did a lot of things that I like. He did a lot of things I didn't like, particularly in his own personal life. I think he was pretty messed up in some of those aspects. But I like him way more than I do his wife, personally. So yeah, I am gonna throw him in the C category. Next up, oh yes, here we go. Calvin Coolidge, perhaps my I'm happy I get this guy off like really quickly. Calvin Coolidge, probably personally, there are two presidents that I think who are objectively better than him, but he's my GOAT, honestly. Calvin Coolidge is probably my personal favorite president. He was a fiscal conservative. This is if you haven't seen Mr. Beat's video on presidential tier list, I recommend you go check it out. He does very good analysis of this. He likes Calvin Coolidge as well. So does Vlogging Through History, who he did a co-op like tier list with as well. I watched that whole thing. It's very good. But with Calvin Coolidge, he was, as I was saying, he's a fiscal conservative who believes in economic choice, personal liberty, like basically just capitalism. People can do whatever they want, start their own business. The government should stay out of people's lives, let them do what they want on the economic front. Very pro-free market, but also anti-crony capitalism. So big corporatism and monopolies and stuff like that. But that being said, he was also a social progressive, not a cultural progressive, but a social progressive. He was a social progressive. He fought for things like women's rights, and during his presidency, he actually guaranteed citizenship for Native Americans, which I, again, really like. So he's basically the most libertarian a president could get. He also only served one term, 4-year term, and that was it. He limited the office of his presidency, and he understood that it should not be a major factor in a person's life. Very similar to George Washington in that way. Um, he believed in the Declaration of Independence, the Founding Fathers, made excellent speeches. Very silent. He was known as Silent Cal because he rarely talked. And there was actually this incident at a dinner party. This may be a myth, I can't remember, where a reporter said to him, President Coolidge, I made a bet with somebody that I can make you say more than 2 words. And he goes, you lose. So he was very, 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 very taciturn. So personally, I love Calvin Coolidge. He's probably my personal favorite president. Next up, Herbert Hoover. I'm going between D and F here. I'm gonna stick with F. Elongated the Great Depression by raising taxes and tariffs. Was very pro prohibition, which again I'm not for. If I was at that time, if I existed in that time, I would not be for prohibition. Prohibition is basically the banning of all manufacture and sale of like liquor. Obviously, that created a lot of crime and bad things happened as a result of that. So, not a huge Hoover fan. He spoke out against things like lynchings and stuff, but I still not a big fan of him. William Henry Harrison, he is out of consideration. He was in the president's office for 40 days, of which like most of the time was spent in bed dying basically from pneumonia because he went out and gave like a very, very, very absorbently long speech at his inauguration and caught pneumonia and died before he got anything done. He was a war hero. He was during the War of 1812. He was a Whig, but again, I'm only judging people based on their presidential term, so I'm going to leave him out of consideration. So Dwight Eisenhower, I'm actually going to stick him at the back over here. Dwight Eisenhower goes at A. Dwight Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex. He again, this does not have to do with his presidency, but just name some other positive things. He planned the D-Day invasion, which ended up succeeding in delivering a massive blow to the Nazis in World War II. And now, just focusing on his presidency, he's basically saved Taiwan by threatening to nuke communist China when Mao was threatening to invade Taiwan. Made peace in the Korean War, mediating an end to that. He supported decisions like sending the 101st Airborne to Little Rock to help like desegregate the schools. He was again a fiscal conservative, believing in things like the free market. So overall, I really like Dwight Eisenhower. He's up there. All right, I'll just take a breather for a second. William Howard Taft. This one, Taft. I think I'll stick Taft at AC. The reason for this being that there was the progressive era of presidents where a lot of presidents were economically progressive. Like there was Teddy Roosevelt, there was Eugene Debs, there was even Woodrow Wilson to a certain extent on the economic front, but Taft was probably the least progressive. Doesn't mean he wasn't progressive at all. He was a trust buster. He took that from his old partner, Teddy Roosevelt, who, by the way, he was the Secretary of War for Teddy Roosevelt. He was a trust buster, but unlike Teddy, he didn't naturally think that big business was a bad thing. He didn't naturally think that like businesses were evil, and he didn't really wasn't really a big fan of Teddy's like theories on monopolies and stuff like that. But doesn't mean he didn't limit the power of corporations at all. He was famously anti-interventionist. While Teddy Roosevelt was like, well, yes, we need to go into World War One like as soon as the British start fighting the Germans. He was more of like a peaceful approach, which I am for and also against in certain situations. So overall, I'll stick him at a C. But also the myth about him getting stuck in the bathtub is exactly that. It's a myth. didn't actually happen. Millard Fillmore is at an F, perhaps one of America's worst presidents, uh, in the fact that he did nothing to help the divisions between the North and the South, exacerbated the divisions between the North and South leading up to the Civil War, and basically, just like James Buchanan, didn't do anything. So I'm going to stick him there. And the things he did do managed to screw things up and make things even worse. Gerald Ford. This is another case like William Henry Harrison, where he was in office for too short a time, so I'm going to stick him out of consideration down here, where I can't really rank him. Ulysses S. Grant. So this is a guy who has divided people on both the left and the right, where I stand somewhere in the middle. I'm all in favor of him, like, sending his support for, like, sending federal troops down south to, like, secure rights for African Americans and their voting rights and their rights as citizens, going after the KKK and being a strong general during the Civil War who led the Union to victory. His friendship with Abraham Lincoln, all that good stuff. So, but also there are a couple things like scandals that happened during his administration that I will admit did happen, but historians have far overblown the effects of those things on, like, everyday life in America just at the time. He was influenced by people around him, which he couldn't really control because of his how much he drank, because of, like, his memories in the Civil War and all the family drama that was going on. So in general, I'll stick Grant at a B. Warren G. Harding, another F. He did speak out against lynchings, I'll admit that, but he was also he didn't do anything about the prohibition issue. He actually, a famous quote for him was I can't remember the exact quote. I'll actually have to look it up. I'll look it up. Hold on. Wait a second. All right. So yeah, I found the quote. It was I am not fit for this office and never should have been here. That was a famous quote from Warren G. Harding. You could plausibly maybe put him at a D, but I'm going to keep him at F. This is there's so many after the Civil War era presidents. This is Rutherford Hayes. Yeah, this is Rutherford Hayes. I'm going to stick Rutherford Hayes at a C. Civil War general, Republican, was in favor of rights for African Americans, but did compromise with the Democrats on that issue, where, like, some very racist groups were able to take control again in the South. Very pro-freedom. He symbolized many of the Republican values around the era of the Civil War, like big business and stuff like that. He was, again, a defender of African American rights, but also compromised with the Democrats on that issue in the South. He actually won the election by one electoral vote, which is insane. It was very close, but he managed to win that election. So on that premise alone, I'll stick him at a C. He wasn't bad, but he wasn't great. So right in between. This one's tough. Andrew Jackson, because I really like him outside of. I really like him. Excuse me, I just got it confused. I really like him, like, in certain aspects outside of his presidency, but then inside of his presidency, I don't like him very much. War hero, fought in 1815, like, basically destroyed the British at New Orleans. Very heroic. Fought in the Revolution, American Revolution. Very heroic. Those are things I like. Is for the common man, which I agree with to a certain extent. Things that I don't like. He went after the banks, which were, like, basic because he was at the time called the Democratic Republicans, but then because of him it would just be called the Democratic Party. Was against the Whigs, which were the continuation of the Federalists. They were much more in favor of, like, banking and centralized currency and all that stuff, being like England. he didn't like that at all. That's one thing I don't like, and also the Trail of Tears is pretty bad stuff. Like, I will admit he did have, I believe he did like adopt Native American to be his son. I will admit that. The whole Trail of Tears thing, not good. Along with the going after the banks and stuff. So in general, should I stick him in a C or should I stick him in a D? I might end up changing this at some point in the future. I'm gonna put him at C for now, but I might move him to D, depending on my feelings at the current moment about him. All right, next up, Thomas Jefferson. I'm going to stick him at an A. Thomas Jefferson, very contradictory president because his personal beliefs, he was very anti-federalist, very for things like states' rights, very for things like Jeffersonian agriculture, and states' rights, as I said, independence, and less federalized government, while like the Federalists were like the opposite of all those things. I would have been a Federalist if I was around at the time, but he was a contradictory president because that's what he believed in his personal life, but he did almost the exact opposite of what he believed because he was a Republican or a Democratic Republican at heart, but a Federalist in policy. He famously said that we should not have a national military, basically meaning that the states should have their own militaries, but founded West Point. He said that the government shouldn't overstep its like power, but he also did authorized many like he went ahead with many wars and like the I think it was under his administration was the Barbary Wars against the Barbary pirates. He also expanded the nation using massive government power, something that he was initially against around his era in the Revolution. Bought it from Napoleon. So in general, like now I'm in favor of small government. At the time, just to build the nation, I would have been in favor of more centralized government. But Jefferson goes at an A just for all that he accomplished. Next up, we have Jefferson's buddy, John Adams, who I talked about in my previous video on the Quasi-War. I talked about him quite a bit in that video. John Adams. I'm going to stick John Adams at a so I'll talk about him first. I like him in his personal life and life outside the presidency, but in his presidency he was not good. So personally, like in my own like personal beliefs outside of his presidency, I'm a bigger fan of John Adams than Thomas Jefferson. Within his presidency, I am more of a fan of Thomas Jefferson. John Adams basically like threw Alexander Hamilton under the rug during his presidency. He was a member of the Federalist Party, but he basically like trashed all the people in his own party just so he could like make peace with France. Not that I'm against that, but that's what caused him to not get reelected because he dismissed Alexander Hamilton and his own cabinet and said that they were insane and that Jefferson was an infinitely better man. That's actually in a scene in the John Adams miniseries back in 2008. I also mentioned that in a previous video. He imposed the Sedition Act, something that I hate. And personally, if I was president, I would make a constitutional amendment that would ban anybody from passing something similar to a Sedition Act. He was more in favor of things like tariffs and stuff, which I know some people, like libertarians like myself. There you go. I just spoiled that I'm a libertarian. A right-leaning libertarian, not like a full-fledged like right-winger, but like a right-leaning libertarian. I'm not against tariffs in certain situations, but in others I am. I know there are some people who are like libertarians on both left libertarian and right libertarian who are like against tariffs across the board, hate tariffs, are like very free trade. And then some people who are both left and right, like conservatives, are like very pro-tariff, very pro-protectionism, like up here in the north. Personally, I'm somewhere in between. I lean a little bit more towards free trade, but I can see protectionism's like worth in policy. He was very protectionist on like things like trade with France. Um, Compared to Hamilton, he was a pacifist because Hamilton wanted to just go in guns blazing, shoot up a bunch of Frenchmen, right? But he was also aggressive to a certain degree. I'm gonna stick John Adams at a D because I don't want to fill up the C category too much. I'm gonna stick him at a D as a president. Andrew Johnson is an F. Tried to fight against civil rights acts and voting rights for African Americans after the Civil War. Wasn't necessarily pro-South, but he didn't do anything to stop like people like the KKK and all that, which led to and he fired I think it was Edward Stanton. I think he fired him over he just fired him, which is actually not allowed. So he was impeached over that issue. So obviously he gets stuck over in the F category. Next up, John F. Kennedy. I'm gonna put Kennedy at a C. Personally, I keep saying personally, in Kennedy's life, outside of the presidency, there's good and there's bad. But again, I'm not ranking them based on that. In the presidency, he was a fervent anti-communist. He very aggressive towards the Soviet Union. Probably the second last Democrat to be like aggressive against the Soviet Union. There was also LBJ, but we'll get to him later. Actually, very soon. He's right down here. But he spoke very well. He made beautiful speeches like we'll go to the moon and we'll do the other things, but not because they're easy, but because they're hard. He was in favor of civil rights. He lowered taxes, which is predominantly Republican thing, if you haven't noticed, which is why the one thing that I like about Republicans, but he was a Democrat who was in favor of that. So yeah, generally, Kennedy's going to be at a C. Like him, some things, don't like him, other things, just very moderate, very in between. Not really much else to say. Although he was president for only 3 years and he was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald in November of, what was it? I can't remember what year. I remember it was in November because we had the, I remember having that, talking about that recently. But, so yeah, James Garfield. I'll stick James Garfield at a B. Again, like a lot of the post-Civil War Republican presidents, in favor of civil rights for African Americans, voting rights, citizenship, all that sort of stuff. General in the Civil War, did things. He was very in favor of the Constitution, very in favor of the Declaration of Independence, very in favor of liberty. From what I know, like most Republicans of the era, they're in favor of business and of capitalism, stuff like that. He was, as I said, a Civil War general Republican. I can't remember what rank he was in the army though. I think he may have been a general, but not really much else to say about him. He wasn't in office for very long, though. He was only in there for, what was it? I think it was about 6 months. He was shot and killed. He would have been one of our better presidents if he had gotten to live out his whole term. Mr. Bede said this as well. He would have done many good things as he had planned, but sadly he was killed. So you can't really put him at A or S quite that high, but I'll stick him at B. I think he deserves that. LBJ. Now this is where it starts to get controversial, even more controversial than like the Bill Clinton thing. Democrat. Let's get that out of the way. I'm gonna stick him at D. I know there are a lot of people who are right leaning or on the right who stick him in the F category. I'm not going to bring him that low because, again, his signing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act was good. Other than that, his Vietnam War strategy was very bad. His other policies where he would trying to think of what I was gonna say before. His like things like raising of like debt limits because of like the things he spent on sending troops to Vietnam. His strategy in pursuing Vietnam was bad. It didn't actually begin with him; it began with Kennedy. But he was the one who carried most of the American involvement in the Vietnam War. He was strong against the Soviet Union, um, but again, a lot of like the stuff that happened in his era was that was bad. Had to do with him. Around his era, he did sign the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but that does not mean that he wasn't a racist. He famously said, "I'll have them," can't say that word on YouTube, uh, voting Democrat for 200 years. I'll have them N-words voting Democrat for 200 years. I'm not sure about like the like what's the name of the word, about like the veracity. I think it's called veracity. About the God, I can't remember the word. I think it is veracity. Like about the term escapes me. Oh my God. About the like widespread approval of that quote. I'll just say this: widespread approval of that quote as fact. The sources for it, like I think it's veracity. The veracity of that quote, I'm not sure. There are a lot of sources that say he didn't. That was just a myth or something that people made up. And then there are other widely credited sources that say he did say it and they have evidence of it and all that kind of stuff. Personally, I believe he did say it. But yeah, so I'm going to stick him at the D category. I don't like LBJ. There is Abraham Lincoln, first president who I'm going to stick up in the S tier. Abraham Lincoln, first like major president. Like there were presidents before who spoke out against slavery and stuff and abhorred it in their personal life. Famously, George Washington owned slaves, abhorred it in his personal life. Freed his slaves and all that, but that was a different era. First president to take decisive action against slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, all that good stuff, freeing the slaves, winning the Civil War, keeping the country together, attempting to heal the country, but he was sadly assassinated. What else is there? There's so much good stuff about Lincoln. He was a strong believer in what the founding fathers wrote. There are some people who say like, "Oh, he wasn't because he was in favor of all these new ideas and stuff," but he was very traditional when you think about it. He took the things written by the founding fathers. He loved the founding fathers. He looked up to them, who founded this nation, even though they differed from him on some things, and he took their writing. He truly thought that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were genius documents from a new enlightened people. He took them and he said, these things are brilliant ideas, but if America is going to live up to these ideas, then we have to abolish slavery, because in the Declaration of Independence it goes, all men are created equal with certain inalienable rights, those including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He believed that those rights had to be extended to like more people, not merely just the white people in America. So that's why I put him at S tier. He is definitely an S tier president. Benjamin Harrison, I'm going to put him at a C. Not very memorable president in between both of Grover Cleveland's non-consecutive terms. Republican, served in the Civil War. What can I say? He was similar to McKinley in some ways, similar not. Again, he was in favor of some forms of tariffs, which I'm here and there on. Again, like a business era Republican. I don't know a lot about certain Republicans. I mean, certain Republicans, certain Democrats, certain presidents in general. I don't know a lot about the certain presidents with it, especially within this era. Like I know a lot about presidents in the beginning of the United States and then towards the modern era, but then when you go in the middle with a couple exceptions. I know less and less, and like about the 5 presidents after Abraham Lincoln, with an exception of Grant and Andrew Johnson, I don't know a lot about. Haven't done as much research on them, and when I do, maybe I'll update the tier list. But I'm just gonna stick him at a C for now. James Madison. I will put James Madison at not S, not quite there. James, you're not quite at Lincoln tier yet, but James Madison, responsible for the War of 1812, which I'll admit flat out that while like I agree with the Federalists more on things around that policy, around their policies at the beginning of the nation, I'm for the War of 1812, 100%, man. Like the invading Canada and stuff, bring freedom to Canada, yeah, like America, F yeah stuff. But he was very patriotic president. He helped draft the Federalist Papers, which he alongside Alexander Hamilton. He was actually Democratic Republican, but he helped draft the Federalist Papers, which is quite interesting. He one of the founding fathers, signed the Declaration of Independence, but again, this is all stuff outside of his presidency. Within his presidency, fought to defend American sovereignty from people who didn't take them, countries who didn't take them seriously. Britain's like, haha, you can't trade with France because we're at war with them. And then Madison was like, no, screw you, I get to trade. We're a sovereign nation. You don't get to push us around anymore. We don't belong to you. And as a result, Britain started like impressing sailors and all that stuff and attacking American shipping. So he was like, all right, I had enough. And he declares war, which in my opinion was a strong move by him. I like him a lot for that. And yeah, so I think he belongs in the A tier. William McKinley. This is where I'm sort of divided because half of the stuff about McKinley I like, or like I'd say about 40% of it I like, and about 60% of it I don't like. William McKinley was a very religious president. That's a plus for me. He was a Civil War veteran. That's a plus. He was a business era Republican. But when I use the term business era Republican, I mean they were strong defenders of things like advancing America forward on the economic stage, competing with other countries, and limiting taxes so that the economy can grow, and pushing forward with laissez-faire capitalism and stuff like that. Most Lincoln era Republicans were like that. All the way up until, the Republican Party has remained like the party of big business all the way until, in like economic freedom and capitalism all the way up until like today. So, not that the Democrats weren't, but I'm just saying that the Republican Party has been like that for a while. Yeah, but so for pluses, his strengthening of the U.S. military I generally like for defense purposes. His lowering of taxes to help. I get that he lobbied with like corporate paymasters and all this stuff, and he was very influenced by people around him. Some of that's bad, some of that's like fine in my opinion. The economy was really good under his presidency, and part of it was due to his economic policies. Making sure American trade was protected, again, protectionism, but he was in favor of tariffs, which I'm here and there on. I'm more for a free market guy within domestic policy, but I'm more of like a free trade guy as well. But again, I see the purpose of protectionism in some areas. Lower taxes caused economic growth. That's all good stuff. But bad stuff, Philippine-American War. Again, I'm on the interventionist issue, like I explained with Bush in the very beginning. I am in favor of interventionism in some situations, and in some situations I am not. A situation where I will not be in favor of interventionism would be in things like America sticking their nose into countries where they don't belong, going like, oh, we need to spread freedom across the world, and like all these countries need to be liberated from tyrannical governments and stuff, right? Like America here, we're free from tyrannical government because we have the founding documents. We have First Amendment, the Second Amendment, all the stuff to protect us, and we can keep that freedom if we're here. But some countries in the world just don't want freedom. Like, we'll go over there and see, like, we'll introduce like a democratic style government, and then expect them to be fine with it. Some countries are just different than the USA, and we can't really change that. Philippine-American War, totally, all the blood from that's on his hands. All the involvement in that. American Army did some nasty stuff there. Not denying that. I like the American Army. I have many relatives in the past who fought in the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, U.S. Marines, and all that stuff. But blood from that is definitely on his hands. Spanish-American War is both a plus and a minus. Freeing, like, people in Cuba and those islands from, like, what had been, like, Spanish tyranny, which I feel like was really bad, was good in expanding America's borders to that area was good and bad. Because, again, it's an example of America sticking their nose where I sort of think they belong because it was right on our doorstep, but I also sort of don't. As a general rule, I'm sort of a fan of and not a fan of that. Teddy Roosevelt, of course, went over there. He was a badass. Won many battles. Kicked ass, and we won. He was very effective on that. So in general, I don't think we should go around doing that necessarily. But when we did do that, he did it effectively. So I'll give him that. So I think I'm going to stick with McKinley at a C. James Monroe. I'm going to put Monroe at a B. The Monroe Doctrine, basically saying that we'll stay out of European conflict. So much for that one. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Woodrow Wilson and FDR. But the Monroe Doctrine saying that we won't get involved in foreign conflicts, something that Washington was very much in favor of. He helped mediate the differences between North and South when, like, his presidency was symbolizing the era where, like, because before him there was anger, but it wasn't really on the, like, so bad it was on, like, the brink of, like people getting ready to kill each other. He helped mediate that because it started like the division and, like, the hatred started to gather, like, momentum during his era as president, but he helped mediate that. He was again, the Monroe Doctrine, all good stuff. Helping form the nation even more. He was actually on the boat with Washington in the famous picture. I actually have one out in the garage of them crossing the Delaware River during the Battle of Trenton and the Battle of Princeton and all that stuff. He was in the Revolution, but again, not a part of his presidency, just adding context. But Monroe overall, I think he belongs up in the above the midway point, in the upper half of presidents. Personally, I like him. Controversy detected. Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon. Things I like. I think his strategy about the Vietnam War was better than LBJ's, but that doesn't mean it was good by any stretch of the imagination. He increased troop involvement in the Vietnam War, which on the Vietnam War issue, I'm actually pro-interventionalist. World War II, Korean War, World War I, I'm all in favor of interventionism in those situations, because in general, I'm not a never interventionalist or a always interventionalist. In situations where a grander threat or just a minimized threat poses a threat to the United States sovereignty and our freedom, I am in favor of interventionism. Like World War II Nazis and the Nazis in Germany and the militarists in the Japanese Empire and the Italian fascists trying to take over the world was definitely a threat. It was best to stop it then, because it would have eventually become a threat to American sovereignty and our freedom. Same with the Korean War. Everybody thinks that we shouldn't have been sticking our nose there, but if North Korea conquered South Korea, they would have gained even more power and been able to become like a superpower, like they sort of are now, not really. And that since they were closer to us, they would have posed a threat in the grander scale, allied with the Soviet Union and spreading communism, which would, with their aggressive actions, would have directly threatened American sovereignty and American health. And it's the same thing with the Vietnam War, with the Korean War. They ended up winning in that situation. But if the Soviet Union didn't collapse, and in all these other wars that we intervened in, if we didn't, there'd be communist countries all over the world, and then since we would be outnumbered if we didn't go into those places, then we would then they'd start just nuking us. So in general, that was just like a side note. I'm like a sometimes interventionalist, not a never interventionalist. I'm not always a fan of imperialist war, though. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. Generally, I'm not. Nixon, back to Nixon. Nixon, with his involvement in the Vietnam War, he brought it to a close, which was good. Which is good, not necessarily the end result was good because the North took over the South, but him like saying, "All right, we're done here. We've lost too many lives. It's gone on for too long," was good. His again lowering of taxes, leading to a sort of hesitation of inflation, not necessarily stopping it outright. It still was happening, but made it a little bit less of a problem. His warmness towards China was both good and bad. Bad in the aspect that it gave them more freedom to do what they wanted, and we didn't like threaten them, and we didn't like be more aggressive with them, which would have deterred them from doing some of the things they're doing now. I don't really like how warm he was to China in that situation. I already mentioned the economic stuff and that other stuff. I think this is a tough one. I think I'm going to throw Nixon. I mean, Nixon. Where should I put you? This is a real tough one. I'm trying to think of some more things to mention that may like gradually sway myself to a definitive position for this guy, but I can't really think of much. Oh God. Jeez. Oh, there are a few other things to mention. He actually ran for president a couple times before he managed to win. When he won almost every state in the union, much like Ronald Reagan, with an exception of Minnesota. I think he also lost. First time around, he won like every state, I think, except for District of Columbia, Maryland, and then I think it was Minnesota. But every other state he won, or maybe he lost Massachusetts. I can't remember. But then his re-election, he or maybe it was the other way around. There was the Dixiecrat Party well, there's a Democrat Party with George McGovern, I think, and then there was the Dixiecrat Party with who was it that ran that year? What was his name? It was hold on, I'll look it up. George McGovern, and then the so for his re-election, it was just against McGovern, and that's when he won most of the states. For the first time he ran, it was the first time that he ran, it was for the first time he won, it was he was against George McGovern. No, this is his this is re-election. Yeah, this is his 1960. No. This is yeah. I was right. This is his first election. George McGovern won District of Columbia and then Massachusetts, and that was it. And Nixon won every other state in the Union. And then for his presidential, oh no, that was his re-election. His first election was against Herbert Humphrey as the Republican, and then there was also and then his first election, it was I think his name is George Wallace. Yeah, George Wallace. He was the yeah, I think that was him. George Wallace. Yeah, he was the governor of Alabama, Dixiecrat. He ran as like a third party. I think that was their nickname, the Dixiecrats, like the Southern Democrats. He ended up winning again, but it was by shorter amount. He was also the vice president to Dwight D. Eisenhower. Ran against John F. Kennedy actually, and lost to John F. Kennedy. He was Eisenhower's vice president. I actually went back and watched the old debate between him and John F. Kennedy. That was a while ago. So where should I put him? I think I'll put him as a C. I'll put Nixon at C. Some things I like, some things I don't like. Oh, also the Watergate thing wasn't great. But I mean, wasn't the first time that's happened. LBJ did the same thing to Barry Goldwater's headquarters. Also, yeah, that adds another thing on the LBJ. Everybody's like says that Barry Goldwater was like the Republican candidate who won the South because he was a racist. He was actually like a pseudo libertarian who he was a part of the NAACP. He helped desegregate the Arizona National Guard. He was in favor of civil rights legislation, but wasn't in favor of 1964 Act because he thought it expanded federal power too much. So yeah, just a few things on Nixon that took me way too long than it should have. But Nixon goes at C. Mega controversy incoming. This is where my political leanings get shown more like often, not more vividly. This is the word I was looking for. Barack Obama. I'm gonna throw him a D. All right, there it is. Just to like a basic thing. His Iran deal policy, didn't like that. His raising of taxes, didn't like that. And then lying about it, saying that I will not raise taxes for like people who are not like the top 1% income owners of the United States. Joe Biden promised the same thing. Obviously not what ends up happening, but he some other things like this is minuses versus plus. His talking to Dmitry Medvedev and talking about like how he would like be. It's funny now they're accusing Trump of not being aggressive enough on Russia when he promised them flexibility in which he would sort of lay off, and they ended up taking Crimea under his administration. His I think he did some things where this is a contradiction because he tried to unite the nation, but he also simultaneously divided it. He said he was also like we as a people need to unite as Americans, and we all have to have common goals, and we have to advance the country forward and all this stuff. But then also he said anybody who openly opposes me is against this new ideology of intersectionalism and all this stuff. For those reasons, those negatives. Positives, spoke very 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 thought out as compared to like Trump's bombastic speeches where he just ramble on and go into crazy territory and stuff. He's way more thought out. He was more of like an old fashioned style president in the way he spoke to the people. Um, he first just as an achievement, first African American president. That's good. But generally, let's take Obama to D. George H.W., the better of the two Bushes. I'll give him that. Better of the two Bushes. Vice President to Ronald Reagan. Read my lips, no new taxes. Big for that. I don't, as I've already mentioned, I don't like high taxes. Because I am a right-leaning libertarian. I don't like taxes. Read my lips, no new taxes. Like that. His shutting down of of the people who were like going against us in the Gulf War happened very quickly. It was only a couple days, if I can remember. I think it was 3 days. He wasn't as effective as he probably wanted to be because he was only in office for what was it? It was one term, 4 years. Then he got beat by Bill Clinton, as I mentioned earlier when we were ranking Bill Clinton. But George H.W., I'm going to stick him at C as well. We have a lot of C's. C is the easiest category to fill up, like the mediocre, middle, okay category. Who is this? Franklin Pierce up next is F. Same things that I've said about Millard Fillmore and James Buchanan apply to him. Except he may have been even worse than Buchanan, but he's basically just the same president as Millard Fillmore. Nothing different. Did all the same sucky things. It was really bad. So I have nothing to really say about James K. Polk. I mean, he did suffer from very bad things in his personal life, which led him to not govern as effectively as he was presumed from a president. He suffered from like alcohol addiction and all that stuff because I think it was a member of his family died. But yeah, I mean, he goes an F in my opinion. FDR. Things that I like. World War II pursuit. I just totally botched that word. Can I speak? FDR, World War II efforts and how he led America through World War II. Very good. Like the speech that he made after Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Yeah, all that stuff's great. Offering to protect Americans in like the on the islands and stuff during the war. He was like, we have to go out there and secure these places before Japan just goes on an absolute like an absolute mad trip, basically. He served a lot of terms. He had the most terms of any president in American history. Other things for FDR. So not like I said. There's this other video on the internet by Vlogging Through History, who I mentioned earlier. Who he did a reaction video to one of his I believe it was it was Ben Shapiro's video on ranking the U.S. presidents, which I will admit I am a Ben Shapiro fan to a certain degree. It doesn't mean I agree with him on everything, or a few things that I do disagree with him on. Just as his name is Chris from Vlogging Through History mentioned, but what he said in his video, because Ben was very politically biased in his video, where he was saying, yes, I agree with Ben on a lot of these things, but I rank the presidents based on what they did for the nation rather than my own political leanings, which may seem different to what I've been saying for the past 30 minutes, because almost before every president I've listed what party they are, like Lincoln Republican, Calvin Coolidge Republican, Dwight Eisenhower Republican. Like I've listed like who's a Republican, who's a Democrat, Kennedy Democrat, like all this stuff, right? But that's just because I'm giving information on who the president is, not necessarily because they're like I only like one party and not the other. There are plenty of Democrats who I would have voted for in the past, and there are plenty of Republicans I would have voted for in the past. Like generally, I probably would have voted for more Republicans, but doesn't mean that that I'm purely biased against all Democratic presidents, because there are many that I do like a lot. That being said, where now I am telling you that I rank presidents based on how good they did for the nation, not based on my own biased political leanings. That being said, FDR, putting the placing of like Japanese American Japanese citizens into camps, yeah, that's pretty shady, to say the least. His pursuit of World War II is excellent. Making friends with Woodrow Wilson. No, oh my God, how did I just? Winston Churchill. I don't know why the hell I said Woodrow Wilson. I got those mixed up in the past too. There's a couple times where I've gotten those mixed up and then had to correct myself. I don't know, something about their names that sent me off or something. Making friends with Winston Churchill, and even the Soviet Union to a certain extent, because even though right after the war was over, we became enemies with them. For all the right reasons, and but making sure we consolidated in an alliance with them to defeat the current people who posed a threat to the world was all great from him, and also like I guess he did help to solve the depression to a certain degree by increasing production of war materials like tanks and planes and stuff like that. That being said, when it comes to the Great Depression, everybody likes to blame it on what's his name? It's right there. Everybody likes to blame it on Herbert Hoover. Yeah, everybody likes to blame it on Herbert Hoover, which is wrong which is wrong and also right. Because Herbert Hoover screwed everything up to a certain degree. He refused to reintroduce like certain alcohol, like getting rid of alcohol restrictions, because that would have helped jog the economy, because people would start like selling things and selling alcohol, and it would become a market again, and people would start creating businesses based on that, and you wouldn't have the new income tax that the prohibitionists created to deal with the revenue that the government was getting from alcohol companies and stuff. But Herbert Hoover, most of the blame, it's fair. Most of it falls onto him. But there's a but. FDR can also share some of that blame. A lot of people are big fans of the New Deal. I am not a big fan of the New Deal. The economic policy of like labeling people who disagree with you, anybody who disagrees with you, as like some like corporate some corporate like cash bag person who he was a class warrior. Like I said, he labeled anybody who was not like within his circle of like extreme economic progressives. He labeled them as corporatized lobbyists. He labeled them as at the top and wanting to like oppress the working men of America and all that stuff. He was very class warrior. He was very a class warrior person. He had polio. He suffered from that. He pushed through. He got America through World War II, and to a certain degree, part of it with the New Deal elongated the Great Depression. Part of it with his increased production of war materials did help. So I know this is really an eventful pick for FDR. because he was a very strong like president who did like a lot of like very influential, effective things in American history. So it just feels kind of bland putting him as a C. So I'm gonna put him at C. But I wish I could put him at a more interesting place. But I mean, actually, this is real tough. I don't want to put him at D because he did do some good things. I'm certain he's certainly not going in F. And he's certainly not going in A or S. He's one of these three. Should I put him at B? Should I put him at B? I think I'll keep him where he is for now. James K. Polk, Democratic Republican, Democrat at the time because, sorry, I'm getting a call. Alright, I'm back. I just had to pause the recording real quick there. So, who was that? Oh yeah, James K. Polk, responsible for widening America's borders into the western areas of what was then Mexican-controlled North America. The annexation of Texas was in part due to him and in part due to John Tyler. They were an independent nation for a good 8 years, I think it was, right? It was either 8 or 6 years. Texas Republic, Sam Houston, they were an independent nation for a good solid amount of time, but then they were annexed by the United States. He was a genius because he like sent American troops to the border with Mexico and then like fire a couple guns, and then when the Mexicans felt threatened by the American troops, like they were like attacking or something, they attacked back and the Americans retreated. And then he was like, "Oh, American blood has been shed on American soil." I mean, it was really genius strategy of him to like provoke a war. Not that I agree with it, but like it was genius. And in general, like interventionism, I've talked way too much about this in this video, is about foreign areas. I'm not necessarily against manifest destiny. Like we believe that the North American continent, this area, not necessarily Canada or like the Central American areas, but like this part of the uniquely American hemisphere of the world should belong to us, and I don't necessarily disagree with that at all. He recognized the Texas Republic until they wished to be annexed by the United States, which I think happened under John Tyler. He seized California from Mexico, and then entered into peace deal with them. He was a very, very, very effective president. He was only a one-term president. He only served for 4 years. He pledged. He was like, "I'm only going to be a one-term president. I'm not going to serve any longer than one term in office, and then I'm going to leave." But for a person who was only in there for 4 years, he was very, very effective in getting what he wanted done. And so much drastic change happened under his administration. Like America went from being just like on the east coast of the what is today the United States, with the original British colonies with a few added lands from the Louisiana Purchase, like Ohio and Indiana Territory and the Illinois Territory, Kentucky and Tennessee, like those areas. But it was mainly the eastern half. It went from that all the way to like almost what, with an exception of Alaska, was present day USA. And all thanks to James K. Polk. So for that alone, I think he easily deserves a B tier, at minimum. John Quincy Adams. So this is a tough one. He a lot like his dad, where like I like him outside of his presidency, but inside of his presidency there wasn't much there. He was Supreme Court. He went back into Congress after famously went back into Congress after he was done with his term as president. The Amistad case, where I'm back. I just had to go do something for a while, but I am back to continue ranking the presidents. So I was on John Quincy Adams, I believe. Yep, I was. So John Quincy, like I said just before I left, I think it was outside of his presidency, very fascinating man, very wonderful man, and all the things that he did, and just he was, it's the same thing with John Adams, right? Like outside of his presidency, like I love him as a historical figure; he's great, but like within his presidency, it's pretty uneventful to say the least. I mean, he did. I mean, technically, the Supreme Court cheated Andrew Jackson out of the victory because he technically actually lost. He had less electoral college votes, but during the process and the counting, the Supreme Court basically handed him the presidency, which Andrew Jackson was not happy about at all. But in general, decent. He's better. He's better president than his father was, so that's for sure. So I'm gonna put him in the C category, actually. All right, Ronald Reagan, one of my top favorites. Just before I start saying anything, I'm gonna throw him in the A. Ronald Reagan. He finished off the Cold War. Well, it was technically the last person to be president during the Soviet Union's existence was George H.W., but he was in the closing era of it. But that doesn't mean that it was less severe. It actually tightened. Tensions raised during that period of time. He was very aggressive with them, calling them an evil empire, tear down this wall, telling Gorbachev that he actually became like good friends with Gorbachev, which is quite weird. But he very aggressive in his foreign policy against the Soviet Union, very anti-communist. He he had a couple dumb ideas that were sort of funny, but I do kind of like him just because he's coming off from a premise like Star Wars and the defensive anti-nuke shield, and yeah, the only problem was that he spent too much money, but that money, like unlike with other presidents who just spent money on random crap that didn't like do anything for like the to help jog the economy or to help jog infrastructure or anything. He spent it on things that actually mattered, like defending the United States and getting the economy back on track. So that's one reason his aggressive foreign policy. This is pluses with that I'm going over. His reduction in taxes, lowering taxes, causing America to get out of the economic calamity of inflation that was happening in the 1970s. Like him cutting taxes caused decades of economic growth after him and during his presidency. Another example of why, like generally like Republicans more on economics is lowering taxes and stuff. I always like that. And also this revival of American like culture and American pride during his administration was all absolutely great. So I think Reagan is A tier in my opinion. I know some people have a B at C, and then there are some people more left leaning who have them down by the D or F. But I'm not even ranking these based on. I have some of my own biases tied in here, but I'm trying to rank them as objectively as I can. Um, as objectively as I can without with only recognizing the good that they did for the nation while including some of my own leanings. All right, so that's Ronald Reagan, I guess. Sorry, I'm not finished. A couple cool personal things. He was an actor in many movies, many movies. Played George Custer in one, I believe. He played George Custer in Santa Fe Trail, I believe that was the name of the movie. George Custer is one of my favorite Civil War generals. Well, he wasn't a general during the Civil War. He became a general after the Civil War, a major general. But he was cavalry commander during the Civil War. He one of his heroes or his idols that he looked up to was actually Calvin Coolidge, which I always thought to be funny because Reagan couldn't close his mouth. He was always telling jokes and stuff, and then silent Cal over there, right here, was always like never saying anything. He was very cast turn. So I see the similarities and also the differences. But yeah, it's a couple of cool things about Ronald Reagan. Zachary Taylor. Let's stick him in D. He was a general during the Mexican-American War. He was a Whig. Other than that, I don't really know much about him. He didn't like a lot like these people. He didn't like most of these people, not Herbert Hoover or Jimmy Carter or Warren Harding, but like these people didn't really do much to prevent like the Civil War from happening. He didn't make the division any worse, like most of these people did. But he just didn't really do much. He was a slave owner himself. He didn't. I'm not sure if he like if he believed it was morally wrong or if he had any like uh, different sort of beliefs on it. But he was just sort of bland. Didn't really do much. He was only in there for like I think it was 4 years. So not much. He got elected mainly because of his popularity for winning like the Mexican American War. It wasn't just him. Like there was also Winfield Scott and people like that. But yeah, Theodore Roosevelt. A lot of you are going to be shocked about this one. A tier for me. Put him, what? Put him next over here. Yep, he was Theodore Roosevelt. A tier. An absolute badass. I'll just say that up front. Went over to Cuba during the Spanish-American War with a volunteer regiment entirely. This is again not talking about his presidency, so this is influencing my ranking. But again, I'm only ranking them based on the presidency. This is just the interesting facts. Went over to Cuba with a volunteer cavalry regiment and won a lot of battles. And he gained so much recognition that made him popular enough to become president, that he was a war hero who basically won the Spanish-American War for the Americans. There were a couple other American officers, but he was there doing a lot of the work. There were a lot of good movies on him with that. There's actually a miniseries that came out quite recently about Teddy Roosevelt. All right, that's just interesting facts. Also, another interesting fact: he had asthma growing up, like really really bad asthma. He could barely breathe. He was constantly having like asthma attacks, where his parents would have to like take him outside, drive him around in a wagon just to get air into his lungs. Yeah, he had really bad asthma. He he was a really tough guy. He, like boxed with military officers in the White House. He what else? He practiced like martial arts, like jujitsu and stuff like that. And he died. And a lot of people, I can't remember exactly who it was. It was a historian who, or somebody, I can't remember, who said when he died, the death had to take him when it was in the middle of the night when he was asleep, because if he was awake, there would have been a fight. I agree with that. Like Teddy Roosevelt was just such a tough dude. He's a big burly man, which is so weird because if you actually listen to audio clips of his voice, because we actually have audio clips of presidents going all the way back to where's Grover Cleveland? Yeah, all the way back to Grover Cleveland, talking about like presidents just talking. I think he was the first. Maybe it was him. He was like the first president to have like audio recorded of him. So Teddy's voice was very high pitched, very tangy. He wasn't necessarily like this big deep voiced guy, but he was like strong and all this. That setting that aside, during his presidency, he helped integrate the new like American colonies of Cuba and the Philippines into like getting them more involved. He was a trust buster, but in that sense, he was good because there was at the time like I'm a guy who's into like laissez-faire capitalism and big business and all this stuff, and I get that he was a progressive, right? But he was trust busting up these big companies because they held monopolies. And if he hadn't, then they would have held monopolies over like. I get it. Today, now in the present day, monopolies are almost impossible. But back then, they were not. Back then, monopolies were big issues to the free market because it would just be one person dominating the space. So in a way, Teddy Roosevelt was trying to create space for like small businesses and competition, as opposed to like these monopolies having control over everything. He wanted to go into World War One earlier than Woodrow Wilson, and ended up taking us into it. We'll get to Woodrow Wilson soon. He's right there. And then, so there's that. I'm trying to think. There was another thing that I had to say. Oh yeah. His conservation of U.S. The U.S.'s natural beauty and animals. He actually had the most pets of any president, I believe. Actually, yeah, he easily had the most. And the White Houses are just like filled with animals. He wanted to conserve America's natural beauty. He created the laws that protected wildlife and stuff like this, and also, you knew I was getting to it. Created the American National Parks and instituted laws to prevent people from like hunting on them and stuff like that. He was a hunter himself. He was big into the hobby, but he was there and he made these national parks so people could go and see these great wonders of the American continent. And in that, I think that he deserves A tier easily. Teddy is great. Actually, my dog is actually named after Teddy Roosevelt. So, yeah, Donald, the Don. I'm actually gonna leave him out of consideration, and the reason why everybody's gonna be like, "Oh, why didn't you rate Donald Trump?" The reason is because he was too recent, and also he can run again. He can run, and I think he's even pledged that he's gonna run again in 2024. So seeing how that campaign goes, if I'm gonna do another ranking, I'll have to pull a Grover Cleveland. But if I'm gonna do another ranking, then I will if he becomes president after that, or I'll just keep this tier list, and then I'll change his position after he's finished his office. I know that there are some things that I like about him very much, and then there are other things that I don't like about him. So I'm just gonna leave him out of consideration for now. Harry S. Truman. I think his middle name's S, right? Harry S. Truman. Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but Harry Truman. I'll stick him at a B. Yeah, Harry Truman's a solid B. Led America through the Korean War. Made the controversial yet a decision I support to use nuclear weapons against Japan to end World War II. A lot of people disagree with that. I don't. It caused a lot less casualties that would have happened as a result of invading Japan. That's undisputed. Like, people debate that, but that's just a fact. That was his decision. I agree with it. His support for the establishment of the state of Israel was good. He helping create the New World Order after World War II had ended. He was like Eisenhower, made threats to China. They're both of them, Truman and Eisenhower, very anti-communist. Beginning of the Cold War era presidents, going in with a fighting spirit. So both of these guys I like a lot. So I'll stick him up at B. Not quite an A, but I'll put him at B. I think he deserves that. John Tyler. I'll stick him at D. John Tyler. What about John Tyler? John Tyler was he annexed. I think under his presidency he annexed Texas. When he annexed Texas, that created an imbalance in slave versus free state. Because then after Texas was introduced, slave states outnumbered non-slave states or states like in the north, including like territories, I think, because the Kansas-Nebraska territory hadn't been like completely claimed by either side yet, but there was compromises all the way up until like the 1850s. He introduced Texas, which I don't think was a bad thing. It did upset the balance of power between slave and free states, but the annexation of Texas was not bad. Other than that, he didn't really do much. There were some other like good things that happened in his administration, and a lot of other bad things. But basically, I just think of him as a D. I mean, there were a lot of scandals that happened and stuff like that. And since he didn't really have much of an effect other than the Texas thing, I'll throw him in D. Martin Van Buren, I'm going to throw him in, oh, not F, not quite F. I'm going to throw him at D. He supported the South, famously fought against John Quincy Adams during the Amistad case. Again, not to do with his presidency, but this is just facts. But he did that. He was also, he didn't do anything to help the divisions between North and South. I'm not sure if he exacerbated it, made it worse, but like Zachary Taylor didn't really do much at all, really. So, interesting fact. I believe that, yeah, it was him. He was the only president whose first language was not English. It was Dutch. His first language was Dutch. Which is, I feel like this is just like an interesting thing to mention. That's kind of cool about Martin Van Buren. All right, George Washington up next. George Washington is an S. I mean, anybody who tries to debate this I can't have a discussion with you over that. He founded the country. He was a great man. He brought all of these states together. And said we have to come together and create this country if we want to remain free and if we want to remain as a sovereign nation. He wasn't necessarily a Federalist or a Democratic Republican. He leaned Federalist on some things, leaned Democratic Republican on others. He was an independent, fought in the Revolution, was like he was very like Calvin Coolidge in a lot of ways. He wanted to retire home to Mount Vernon, his plantation or farm, after the war, and everybody begged him to become the new president. So he's the first president of the United States. He could have been a king, could have been some kind of monarch. He could have been like Napoleon, like a consulate, I think it's called, or consular. He could have been that for life and held like absolute power and done whatever he wanted, but he decided to limit his own power, and like he set up the presidential cabinet to because he knew that he wasn't a genius, so he had to have people around him help him, not necessarily like influence him, but like they did, but like but like I'm saying a lot, but but he realized that like a president shouldn't be like this sole figure who thinks they can run everything and they know everything. And this is the stark contrast to like modern presidents and stuff. So he, especially Trump, like as much as like I like a lot of the things Trump did, I'll admit, like, but George Washington was very subtle, a very relaxed man. He liked taking on board the ideas of others, even when he held true to his own ideas. He signed the Declaration of Independence, all this stuff. Within his presidency, he helped keep America. He said America should stay neutral in foreign conflicts. Yeah, so much for that. Like I was saying earlier with Monroe. Monroe was very similar to that. He actually carried on George Washington's like stay neutral policy. He helped unite North and South to create the new nation. He was very in favor of all the things the founding fathers set up for the country: liberty, personal freedom, equality, all these new enlightened ideals. He prevented war with the British and the French Empire, or what would then become the French Republic after the Revolution. He wanted to avoid political parties as to not get too polarized, but Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson were at each other's throats every like 2 seconds, so sadly he wasn't able to prevent that. But 8 years in office, the man set up the country, and that makes him, firmly places him as either the best or second best president in United States history, easily, objectively. Now we come to the last one that I'm going to rank. Oh boy, Woodrow Wilson. A lot of people on both the left and who lean right, like myself, hate Woodrow Wilson, and I do too. Woodrow Wilson sucks. People have been kind to Woodrow Wilson in the past because of like his I ideas like surrounding like how the federal government should work and how much power the president has. Old historians, not necessarily recently, were kind to Wilson and actually liked him a lot, but now more people are waking up to realize how much of like a racist, um, majoritarian, like guy that he was. Like he brought back the Sedition Act, something that I said I absolutely hate. To go after his political opponents and people who disagreed with going to World War One, entering World War One. Again, I agree with entering World War One, but it's totally people's right to oppose that. He actually imprisoned the socialist candidate for president, Eugene Debs, I think his name was. He had him imprisoned for speaking out against World War One. Not that I like socialists or anything. I loathe socialists, but he still has the right to oppose the war if he sees fit. But like he expanded the power of the federal government, not rather than limiting it like people like Calvin Coolidge and George Washington did. He was the stark opposite. He was in favor of prohibition, and he dragged his feet on. I mean, that occurred later, like after his presidency, but in the closing era of his presidency, he was very much in for it. He dragged his feet on women's rights and utterly opposed it outright until they begged him into the point where he was like tearing his hair out of his head and was like, "Fine, I guess you can have your rights." Um, he was he was to a certain degree an economic progressive. Um, to a certain degree, an economic progressive. He raised taxes, raised tariffs, all that kind of stuff. He was actually, despite going into World War One, he was a big fan of how German government was run. Actually, he's a majoritarianist. Believe like stamping out minorities using federal power. The government should expand its power and use it to the best of its ability. Teddy Roosevelt actually believed a similar thing, but Teddy used his office responsibly and to do things that I agree with and that were good for the nation, while Woodrow Wilson did not. Like, I hate Woodrow Wilson, and most people agree with me. Mr. Beat agrees with me. Vlogging Through History agrees with me. Mr. Terry agrees with me. Most other, like Austin Shea Films, all these people, the cynical historian, a lot of these people, like, have pointed out, like, how much of a bad president Woodrow Wilson is, and I couldn't agree more with them. So, there you have it. There it is, my presidential tier list. I will make some. I will amend it in the future if necessary, if I see fit. But I I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video, I guess. So Godspeed.